This is Chris Sampson live from Kyiv, where we do not have blackout at the moment, but um, it's a pretty good chance that we will during the broadcast. And for those who don't know, I'm one of the only hosts that you'll ever see that has to put a bit of a disclaimer out because, well, Russia's a terrorist state, and we have air raids all the time. We have missile attacks, drone attacks all the time. Doesn't dissuade me, doesn't slow me down. Today is 1,402 days of full-scale war for me, and it's 1448 full-scale war for Ukrainians. 4,378 days of hold on, I'm going to get that right of since the full-scale invasion started 12 years ago, and I always have this marked up on my website. It is 4374 since the Russians began their full-scale invasion. And while we wait for Craig, I'll give you a couple of updates. Today, Financial Times falsely said that Zelensky was going to announce in spring elections. No, that is not happening. That is not happening like that. And be very aware that people like Christopher Miller, they rumor mill way too much. I think that one of the keys I love about doing good journalism is you take your time and you double check what you're saying before you go put that out, because it's very stressful to Ukrainians and to supporters to hear that this garbage is happening. So, little thumbs up. Everyone's good on the audio. We're good. Connection good. In fact, as we had yesterday when we had Alexander Kara on, I could only see one viewer that was listening. I had to let's see here. I'm in preview mode. Yeah, good to go. So Craig will be joining us here in a second. Let's see. And we had Alexander Kara on yesterday, and the wiring of this platform did not let me see anyone else that was on. So today we can see messages. Yes, I can see your message. Good to see you. Hello, Arcadian. Hello, Lisa. Hello, everyone else that's in there. I see Patty is joining us. There's a few others that scrolled up. I see we have 19 in here now. And yesterday we could only see one. So I had to have affirmation from my little blankie bin over on the other platform to make sure that people were listening. And, it's good to have an audience so we can kind of real time get a sense of how you're feeling about the conversation. The topics are going to be dynamic as always. Tonight, I really look forward to this conversation because a lot of you always ask, what is it with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? Not good. I have theories, but we're going to talk to someone who's taken the time to do this work and see what he has to say. What did he find when he was looking around in the skeleton bin of Donald Trump's life? We will have a competition of P3 glasses with two Texans tonight with Craig Unger. I'm from the southern part of the state, Houston, and Craig is from Dallas. So we're going to have a Texas night. In fact, Brian Karem, I didn't know Brian was also from Texas. God bless coffee. And also God bless my little team at the cafe. I was able to come and go, and they already had it ready for me. I just had to pick it up, purchase it, and move on to get over here to come talk to you guys. The additional thing, I was out today in the frozen Dnieper River, and I'm from Texas where we don't get to walk on frozen rivers. So I got that wiring. As brave as I may be in some days, I'm not the guy who's walking a little further out, a little further out, and a little further out to see how much I can test it, even though I see Ukrainians on their chairs doing some ice fishing, cutting holes into the ice and digging out to get some fish. And they can buy fish at the market, but it's a lot more fun to actually cut through the ice and reach down in there. So I had a nice little stray dog, totally sweet dog that was walking around with me as I did a little video report to put on this account, and also I put it on my Instagram account for my friends. I have sort of a split audience because I really think of my Ukrainian audience as a little different. I have kind of inner communication of issues that we go through here that I want to talk directly to them on Instagram at my account over there. And then I want to really move more to Substack because of the toxicity of Twitter. Elon Musk and the Nazis like to run reign free over there, and I'm more about us getting information across. So we'll use that platform. We're not taking our foot off the platform there because I think that that's not going to be useful. However, I would advise completely removing all footing from TikTok. A couple of influencers or voices we like have actually had very interesting issues over there, including having captions changed. One guy showed the difference between two videos he uploaded where they had actually changed the caption on TikTok to say this person was at an anti-ICE rally when he wasn't. And that's not cool. And then today, I don't know if you guys follow that account known as Tizzy. And Tizzy posts a lot of videos about people who attacked other people, trying to get the community to pay attention to these things. And they struck it down as misinformation when he was posting about the Epstein files, even though he sourced it. And why? Because it's now MAGA TikTok. It's not Chinese TikTok. It's MAGA TikTok. So we can't really engage in that. We're not here. I mean, I could argue from a psychological warfare point of view, if you have your mind together and you go out and decide to take it on full bore, there are some things we could do. So, but tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the issues related to not simply Trump, but also the way in which the Republican Party has often played these games of shadow diplomacy in the background. And let's see, you're saying you have a I can't really restart because we already got it going here. We have links out, but I think we're good. I'm on Wi-Fi, so if anyone else is having an issue, let me know. But just let me know. And the good thing about this platform is when we're done, the video is posted, so you don't really miss out. If you happen to join late, you can catch some things. Let's see here. Let me see if it'll. Let me try to get. I'm gonna send one more recent. I'm just working out the technical issues here. Craig's trying to jump in here with us. He'll be in here in just a second. Bear with me. And no problem. See how we go. Additionally, tomorrow we'll have John Fugelsang on, and Friday we will rejoin with Sean Penner for our regular. I think we're going to keep it that way. Regular scheduled program on Fridays to give you an update from Ukraine. We have a full list of options or topics we're working on, and let me see if I can't get him a link. Let's see here. And then on Saturday, hold on a second. Let's see. It's saying it's only in preview mode. One minute, I will get this worked out. Let's see. So Craig's trying to join us, so bear with me. We're just trying to get why it's saying join or preview mode only. See if we can restart the browser. Maybe that will work. And we'll be patient to do that. right? Everyone's patient for that because this is going to be a good conversation. Yeah. Let's see. Can't see anything or anyone else's messages. Yeah, I see your messages, by the way. I see Arcadian and Lisa, etc. So we're just going to get this technical item worked out. And so we have Sean, we have John Fugelsang tomorrow, Sean on Friday, and then I'm already racking up the Culture Saturday segment, a few videos and some information bits to share with you. I don't know if I'll go an extended length of time. I kind of went a little bit longer last week because I was testing out the broadcasting software that I normally use for YouTube and others. I'm going to be using it for this platform, and we will get some different content that is on storage because the way we're doing this now, a lot of my friends who are using this platform, we just basically fire up our phones and have a conversation with you. I think Jim Acosta is one of the only ones who's doing the other way. There we go. Hey.
Hello. I'm using my phone now. Some reason it didn't seem to work on the computer.
Oh, okay. Well, glad you're here and good to see you. I was telling we have a Texas team tonight. You're a North Texas guy, I believe, and I'm a Houston guy.
I'm from Dallas.
Dallas.
I have to say I left some time ago.
Smart man. Me too. So, look, I want to really thank you for being here, number one, because there's a lot of people when I talk about the relationship between Trump and Putin, they'll always say, have you read Craig Unger's book? And I have. I don't have it with me in Ukraine, so we'll have to work that out. But you have not only those two books, but tonight what I really want to do is kind of show how the Republican Party has been at this for a while. And your book of Den of Spies, which came out 2 years ago, really reminded me that this is not a new phenomenon. And someone even said the other day that, if Reagan were alive today, he'd be MAGA as hell. I always say, try not to take too much of the historical block and move it into modern times. But let's talk about that. Let's start with the Reagan era before we get into the Trump era that we're very saturated with, and say, what can we learn from those activities in 1980 or 1979 into 1980 that give us a little precursor of where we're at now?
Right. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back even further.
Go back as far as you want to go.
Well, I'm going to leave the Civil War, okay, though it does go back to that in a way. But in 1968, well, it was really in 64 and 65, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And that changed the electoral calculus enormously. People forget that the Democratic Party during the Civil War were they were pro-slavery. Those were the slave owners.
Right.
And so you had, even in the 60s, when I was growing up in Dallas, you had right-wing racist Democrats who dominated the South, the Dixiecrats. And when Lyndon Johnson signed those bills, that was over. That ended that era. And it changed the electoral calculus enormously, so that a lot of the right-wing Democrats, the racist Democrats, became Republicans. And the Republican strategy in 68 became the solid South. And if you look at the electoral map in every electoral presidential election since then, with only a couple of anomalies, the solid South, the red states, sure look a lot like the Confederate States of America. And that is not just an accident. Right. And that became the Southern strategy, and the Republicans have used it to this day. And the Democrats have been most successful in fighting it. The two anomalies in those presidential elections since then were when the Democrats got a presidential candidate from the South, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and that was it. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, it's a good reminder. And, a lot of people will be having that thrown at them from Republicans go, well, it was Republicans who freed the slaves. It was Democrats were the evil ones, and they always want to ignore the switch.
Absolutely, but it switched over. It did switch over. The other thing that happened in 68 that was enormous, that really does pave the way for the kind of things we're talking about now, is the Vietnam War was going on. The Democrats, Lyndon Johnson really did want to stop it, and he
Hmm.
started the Paris peace talks in October of 1968. And just as they're approaching the November election, suddenly the South Vietnamese said, "Nah, we don't want to negotiate." And what had happened was Nixon had contacted, used an intermediary, a woman named Anna Chennault, to contact the president of South Vietnam and persuade him to withdraw from the peace talks, so that the war would still be going on. The Democrats would have egg on their face, and Nixon could say he had a peace plan, which was kind of bullshit, and it was really the same peace plan Johnson was doing, which is get the hell out of there, withdraw.
Hmm.
We made a mistake in the first place. But Nixon continued the war, of course, for I think it was another 6 years when he was elected, and tens of thousands of Americans died, and more than 1 million Vietnamese, and it was just horrifying. That act that was an act of real treachery, possibly treason, and it meant that the Republicans, who were not in office, they had no authority whatsoever, but that the Republicans had hijacked American foreign policy for their own partisan reasons. And people died as a result of this. But Lyndon Johnson confronted Nixon about it on the telephone and secretly recorded it. And Nixon kind of thought that was happening, but he
Hmm.
called it an act of treason, actually. And when Nixon was running for reelection, he was petrified that Johnson had taped the conversation, as Johnson had indeed done. And he wanted to find those tapes and any documentation. So he put together a group of burglars. I guess that's the best way to call them.
Right.
They were known as the plumbers, and they broke into the Brookings Institute. They broke into an office building in Washington that was called the Watergate. So the Watergate scandal grew out of the first 1968 scandal. So there you have two big scandals like that. Okay.
Right.
And what I write about in Den of Spies is a third scandal along the same lines. And once again, you had the Republicans hijacking American foreign policy. And in this case, it happened after the Iran hostage crisis.
Hmm.
And Iran had attacked the American, Iran had overthrown the Shah.
Hmm.
Militants attacked the American embassy and seized control of it, and they captured 52 Americans as hostages.
And they
And
kept a lot of Americans. I was 10 at the time. They kept a lot of Americans glued to the television, endlessly waiting, like in a type of event that I don't know if we had any parallel, at least in the media age, where Americans were glued to the television and where how that was going to evolve.
absolutely. It was ABC News put together a whole news show, ABC Nightline with Ted Koppel,
Hmm.
and day after day after day, they covered one story:
That's
America
right.
held hostage, and it was day number one, day number two, to up to 444 days it took
Hmm.
before they were before they were returned, and instantly the Republican campaign manager for Ronald Reagan was Bill Casey, who to me is one of the great, probably America's greatest or most dazzlingly brilliant spy, a wonderfully interesting character. I describe him sort of as a mix between uh, James Bond and Mr. Magoo. He was very awkward and ungainly physically. He was always going in a dozen different directions.
Hmm.
When he got nervous, he'd chew on his necktie.
Mm.
He wanted to be Secretary of State with Reagan, and Nancy Reagan would absolutely not have this guy overseeing formal state dinners when he couldn't eat properly, and he'd be spilling wine on his cummerbund and stuff like that. But he was enormously brilliant, and he'd been a great spy in World War II, where after the Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day,
Mhm.
um, he helped pave the way for them to take Berlin. And he knew where the French resistance was. His spies knew where the German forces were to be avoided. And he did an extraordinary job in that regard. After World War II, he was not in a service the intelligence service, so far as I know, until 1981 when he became CIA director.
Right.
But he was very much an operative during those intervening 35 years, and
Yeah.
um, and there were a lot of unhappy people in the CIA during that period. In 1975, the CIA had kind of been shut down. I mean, the Church Committee and the Pike Committee did very, very serious investigations. It's the kind of congressional accountability that we really, really need today.
Right.
And part of, when I write, I've done 6 books on the Republicans' assaults on democracy. And what happens again and again is all the checks and balances erode one after another, again and again over the last 40 or 50 years.
Well, I kind of switched from being a young man focused on music and then getting into radio to being the head of a small channel and website called Cheney Watch, because I could see early on that we were eroding the balances necessary to at least uphold what I found to be the idyllic America I believed in, right? And the fact that Cheney was using Mitchell and Jessen and black sites and running this entire secondary operation out of the public eye that eventually was surfaced seemed to be a new kind of betrayal. I mean, obviously it wasn't, but to the public it seemed that way. So let's talk a little bit about how that erosion of the checks and balances, the especially the absolute executive branch arguments,
The
led us to
unitary,
yeah, the unitary executive
the
power
unit,
brings us to this modern era. Let's address that.
right? Well, Bill Barr was an important force in it, and actually, there's an interesting book coming out now that I was just taking a look at by Tom Hartman, and he goes back.
Mhm.
Maybe this will give a pre-promotion for him, but he goes back to 1886, and there was a
Mm.
Supreme Court decision, and it was a Southern Pacific Railroad in California, and a suit against I believe it was Santa Clara, the county in California was suing it,
Mhm.
and they were trying to determine the rights of a corporation,
Mhm.
and in effect, the um, the decision didn't really address that question in the end. But when it was written up, and all Supreme Court decisions are written up in the U.S. report, something called U.S. report, and it's every Supreme Court decision. And this one had a summary which said falsely that the decision had decided that all corporations, have the same rights as human beings.
Mhm.
And law students read that for decades. And the Federalist Society promoted it. And it's become sort of law, even though it was not really precedent. And that
Right.
and that led to, among other things, Citizens United and all of
Right.
that kind of thing. So that was sort of an important way by which this is corporations more than the presidency, seized enormous power. In the White House, you can see when George H.W. Bush was president, one of his attorneys in the White House was William Barr, who later
Mm-hmm.
became Attorney General, both for Bush and later for Trump. And Barr was a very, very strong proponent of what he calls the unitary executive. And in recent years with Trump, it's just been blown so far out of what the Constitution seems to say that it's absolutely ridiculous. And the Supreme Court, has the John Roberts Supreme Court has given Trump just unbelievable breadth of powers that I certainly hope they're repealed within my lifetime, but that is horrifying, and we see what's happening with the with ICE. Trump really has a secret police force, an enormous secret police force, and they have powers that ordinary police don't have. They're masks, among other things.
Well, one of the things I was just thinking about when you were saying this was that I had a conversation with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson in that area because some of those people knew that I was going after Cheney for war crimes and accountability. I said it's so important we have accountability. And, we had people back then who were very impulsively talking about different ways to deal with Cheney that were outside of judicial means. And I said, if you don't have a trial and you don't have essentially the accountability at the official level, you're wasting your time. And Wilkerson called me and he says, I hate to break it to you. There's no will in DC to do this. And you and I want to do this. I get it. And we were commiserating. It was about a year it was in the first year of Obama. And he said, it's not there. And Nancy Pelosi had run on the accountability measure, but abandoned it quickly.
Right. And historically, you see the Democrats. They bring a knife to a gunfight, and they've been doing it again and again for decades. And when I write about the October surprise and Den of Spies, it's
Hmm.
really pathetic. And the head of the House Foreign Intelligence Committee was Lee Hamilton from Indiana,
Right.
a very well liked congressman from Indiana. And as I studied, it took a really deep dive into the congressional investigation. And people seem to think, oh, it's a bipartisan investigation. This must be the truth. This must be legitimate if both parties agreed to it. And when you really investigate these things, you realize that's not the case at all, because the Democrats have things they don't want in these reports, and they do a little horse trading. And Lee Hamilton, I investigated him forever, and I thought, God, this guy must be corrupt. What's he getting? What's he getting?
Right.
And in the end, I decided, he wasn't corrupt at all. He was just one of those guys who goes along to get along. He doesn't want to raise a fuss. And so the Republicans want something, and he says, yeah, I think we can work it out, even when they're covering up a humongous scandal.
Let's move into the area I know people are most concerned with now. We'll pick it up at 2016 because obviously Trump hasn't let go of 2016. Um, when did you uh, when did the flags start going off to you that we didn't have just the what I call boot kicking fascists coming in, but also the one who had no problem working with a known enemy, a known adversary?
Well, I guess it was 2016, and I have to admit, I'd been in New York during the 80s, and I was at New York Magazine first, and later I worked for Vanity Fair. But as a local city magazine, New York Magazine was on Donald Trump, and
Hmm.
you saw him building his public profile, which was essentially that of a brash real estate guy who was kind of a playboy. His aesthetics were completely wrong for New York, by the way, or at least
Hmm.
as I saw it. He was Vegas or Atlantic City.
Right, right, right.
Um, and I'd heard some rumors about Russia, but initially it really did strike me as quite far-fetched. And I guess what I started to do, I do this with almost every book I do, or even magazine pieces, if there are any magazines around anymore. But
Right.
but I do chronology, I do timelines, and
Right. Right.
if you put down really well-established facts that can be documented, and the source for them, and I have a timeline, and at a certain point you say, well, why did A happen after B? What is the causality there?
Hmm.
And with Trump, I really go back to 1980. I mean, some people, you might go back to 1977 when he married Ivana, and
Right.
the Czech Secret Service was keeping an eye on her. But it was in 1980 that it really struck me what was happening. And Trump had his first and one of his few, very, very rare, true real successes in real estate development, which is the Grand Hyatt Hotel next to Grand Central Station.
Hmm.
And it was at a time when New York financially was in the toilet. When Gerald Ford was president, the New York Daily News had a famous headline: Ford to city dropped dead," meaning the federal government was not going to bail New York, and the whole city was going bankrupt. And the hotel Trump was developing had been the Commodore Hotel, 1,200 rooms, and you know what he paid for it?
How much?
$1. in
Nothing odd about that.
in the great well, I mean, at that time that was everything was bankrupt, but
Right.
it's the greatest location imaginable next to Grand Central Station. I mean, you can't ask for a more, if real estate is location, 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 you can't do any
Right.
better. He also, in redeveloping it, managed to get a 40-year tax abatement from the city. So these are together, and when he developed the hotel, like every hotel, it needed television sets in every room. And you might think a blue chip outfit like Hyatt would go to a major vendor like Samsung or Sony to buy 1,000 TV sets or whatever it
Right.
was. No, 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 no. Trump goes to Joy Ludd Electronics, a small electronics store.
And
uh,
who owned that?
and that was owned by Semyon Kislin, which takes us to Ukraine. It's a long roundabout way to get there. But Kislin had grown up in Odessa, and his family owned the big deli there. Forgive me, I forget its name. Um, and he wanted to come to the United States, and to get to the United States in those days. I mean, this was an era when um, the Soviet Union was anti-Semitic. It was not allowing Jews to emigrate.
Hmm.
And the United States Congress passed a bill which said, well, we will give Russia favored nation trading status, which Russia really, really wanted, but only if they allow Soviet Jews to emigrate.
Hmm.
And I interviewed was he a general? Forgive me. I think Oleg Kalugin, who
Oh yeah, yeah.
was
His book Spy Master is a must-have if you're studying the spy masters.
right, right,
Yeah.
and he lives outside of D.C. in suburban Maryland. And I asked him about all this, and he said, I had an idea. And he went straight to Yuri Andropov, who was head of the KGB, and said, I've got an idea. We will send them Jews, but they will be
Really?
our Jews. In other words,
Mm,
they will wake up as sleeper agents in a way.
right.
And another one of my sources, Yuri Shvets, who
I have
was a
his book. Washington Station. I have his book.
exactly, and he was a major in the KGB, based in DC,
Hmm.
and he said, um, wait, I just that Kalugin was known as a spotter agent. and
Mm.
that meant his job was to scout potential talent, assets
Hmm.
that the Soviets might recruit. And in giving a really good deal for these TV sets to
Hmm.
Donald Trump, uh, uh, um, Kislin was telling Trump, we'll be friends. This is a terrific deal. Let's be friends, and
Hmm.
and that was the start of it, and it went on from there.
Well, really, real quick to the audience, I've studied a lot of the KGB and active measures history, and the evolution from Ivan Agyan's developing the first chief director eventually. That the KGB was focused on diaspora first, controlling the Russians, and then the evolution into the fellow travelers, and then it took a while before they got to the business class, and a lot of that had to do with Andropov being an internationalist compared to the previous chiefs of the KGB.
Right, but in the mid '80s, they were looking everywhere,
Right,
recruiting
right.
loads, and they had loads of spies in New York City, and they also had one major spy in the business class, who was Armand Hammer, who was CEO of
Mm-hmm.
Occidental Petroleum. Um, I guess it's his grandson is something of a movie star now, or I think that's his
Oh,
grandson,
really? Yeah. Okay.
Army Hammer. Yeah, same name.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but Armand Hammer was very close to the Soviets. He had big oil and he had big concessions. I think that went back to Vladimir Lenin. And he was, but by the '80s he was aging out, and they needed people to replace him. And it is likely I mean, that's what they saw in Donald Trump, as someone who knew the business world and could give him that kind of information.
Right.
Um, and Trump, I mean, Yuri Shvets was telling me what are the biggest things you look for when you're trying to recruit an asset. You wonder, well, does he have an ego? Is he a narcissist? Can you flatter him? Is he susceptible to flattery? You wonder, is he susceptible to pretty women? Is that a way of approaching him? Um, is he at
Do they
all?
have an axe to grind?
Yeah. Is he at all greedy? Does he like money? Is there a way of doing that? And so Trump fit almost checked every box. And I think initially they did not have great expectations in recruiting him and as an asset. And I distinguish between an asset and an agent. Being an asset is a much looser relationship. But there's obviously a lot since that happened that makes me think he's very much an asset even today.
Right. Going on more to agent when they have a contract. How did we get to the Yuri Dubinin Estee Lauder dinner?
Well, there are parts I don't know between 80, that took place I think in '86, so there's about a 6-year gap. But I do know in '84, there are really two threads in recruiting Trump, and one was the KGB, which started with Semyon Kislin. The other is um, the Russian mafia. And the Russian mafia is unlike the American mafia in one very, very important way.
Hmm.
And in the United States, the mafia has always been at war with the FBI. In Russia, the mafia is really an adjunct of the secret services, and they
Hmm.
operate. They're allowed to operate freely so long as they're serving those interests. So in 1984, Trump had just built Trump Tower, and a man named David Boganin, who was part of the Russian mafia, he was affiliated with Semyon Mogilevich, who was one of the great Russian mobsters known as the Brainy Don. And
Hmm.
he was a master when it came to money laundering.
Hmm. I remember when just a little after 2016, when there were people who said, Republicans in Florida, who said, I don't believe that. And I said, well, you can read the magazines that say it happened. You can see Irina Dubinina, Yuri Dubinin's daughter, said, well, my dad did that. but it's actually in Art of the Deal. He literally wrote in Art of the Deal, Yuri Dubinin gave me the idea of Trump Tower Moscow.
Right, right. Well,
So you could either believe Trump or his ghostwriter, either way.
right. Well, it's also what happened then. The trip to Moscow in '87 was really set up by the KGB. When a foreigner was invited by in tourists,
Right.
that was really a front for the KGB. Trump went to Moscow. I guess it was in '87. It was the same time Yuri Shvets was also there,
Hmm.
um, grooming his asset. And when Trump returned, something extraordinary happened. And one is he decided to run for president. This is 1987 still.
Hmm. Right.
And George H.W. Bush is vice president, and he's way in front place as the presumed nominee for the Republican to be the Republican candidate as president in '88. And Trump makes a brief attempt to do that. And what's most interesting about it is while he was doing that, he bought a full page ad in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. And it essentially predates his current convictions. I mean, it's all about our allies taking advantage of it. We've got to stop being so nice to Japan. Europe is taking advantage of us. We have to stop all this. And Yuri Shvets was still at the KGB in Yasenevo at counterintelligence headquarters when a cable came in from the Active Measures Department celebrating a great, great success. And essentially, it was this advertisement in the New York Times. They got their talking points being published in the United States. It was a great victory. And they saw it as, wow, we've recruited this asset, Donald Trump, and he's delivered for us.
One book that's not directly on Trump that's of that era that I think our readers should know, our listeners should know about is Sergei Tretyakov, the Comrade J book with Peter Early co-wrote that with him, and he talks about how they evolved into trying to recruit the business class, and they were given little high fives if they got a good fish like that, and so Trump was definitely the big fish for them.
Right, and as time went on, I found it. I haven't looked in a while, but I found at least 13 people tied to the Russian mafia who owned or lived in Trump Tower.
Hmm.
So when you understand that, wow, the Russian mafia sort of provides the eyes and ears for Russian intelligence, and they're based in the home of the president of the United States. Wow, that's something. And by the way, I've written that. No one has challenged it. It's been out for nearly 10 years. But you'd
Hmm.
think that would be news. I think this is you
When you
know?
say it's been 10 years, it's hard to realize it's been a decade since we went through this. Oh my God. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I went down to in Fort Lauderdale when I went down to Sunny Isles, a little Moscow, and went to the Trump Tower Moscow. There was I'm gonna hold on. They'll come to me when I think about it. There was a former FSB guy that owned three offices, one that was in Trump Tower Moscow and two that bookended under a kilometer away north and south on A1A. And we looked at physically went to the locations to see kind of what it looked like, not simply that they owned it, but the proximity. You could just walk over there. You could go to Trump Tower. You could go get your, Russian food at little Moscow shops. And they were very at home around him in Sunny Isles, which is in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami. And he only
Right.
made 70 something $1,000 as an FSB guy. So how would he, Mangashev was his name. How would he have this kind of money? That type of quizzical issue.
I don't know, but in the end, the Russians ended up spending a lot of money on Trump, and there was one study showing, I believe, $1.5 billion worth
Mm.
of Russian assets went through Trump real estate, and then in addition, in the early 2000s, you have Felix Sater and Bayrock who actually have their offices in Trump Tower, and they come up with a new scheme whereby he franchises his name on Trump Towers all over the world. And that's Panama, Toronto, Soho, Kazakhstan. And Trump doesn't put up a dime. All he does is rake in the money. And a lot of these places have collapsed or changed names and really don't exist in their original form.
A lot of accounts in Bank of Cyprus.
I'm sure.
Let's move a little bit through that post 2016 era where clearly the public was getting notified, and you had on July 27, 2016, Russia, if you're listening, you have the release of WikiLeaks. You had Roger Stone working with WikiLeaks to get the documents, which is clearly in evidence, by the way. And it's poured out all over, and he essentially weaponizes those stolen emails exfiltrated from the DNC, from the GRU, to throw the election in 2016.
Right. And I think it clearly had an impact on it. I mean, it's hard to quantify that, but yeah, I suspect Hillary would have won without Russia helping him. And then I mean, just goes on and on and on, and you see so many people who are compromised by Russia.
And now he's back in office.
Yeah, and
And
I think in a lot of ways, I think it's parallel to what's happened in Ukraine, in the sense that with Yanukovych, you essentially had Putin working from inside, trying to overthrow the government from the inside, installing his own puppet there, much as he's installed Trump in the United States. And of course, the man who is most helpful in getting Yanukovych elected was Paul Manafort, who was also campaign manager for Trump, and Manafort made his company made $75 million off of that.
it's really like I live in Ukraine now for 4 years, and when I first stepped foot here, one of the first things I did was pull out the address I had for the Manafort office to figure out where it was. But I literally wiped the plate clean, meaning I knew I needed to learn things from the ground up, even though I had that other background studying what Manafort did here with party regions and Yanukovych. And why I bring that up is that we're in this full scale war now, where Trump is running shadow diplomacy through Witkoff, with Gabbard running intelligence, and now Gabbard's at election offices. Let's focus very much on what's happening now and using that backstory as a bit of a precursor. We don't have guide rails anymore. There is no General Mattis or these other folks who will come in and say, no, even Ivanka doesn't show up to say, Daddy, please don't.
Right, right. No, it's very scary. I mean, um, the CIA doesn't exist, essentially. I mean, that's supposed to protect us internally. And you're right, almost every major figure. I think any. I mean, also, I mean, imagine for a moment you were a mid-level person at CIA or FBI, and you found evidence that I don't know, the Russians were doing something horrible, posing a great threat. Would you want to share it with Tulsi Gabbard, with Kash Patel? You know, I don't think so.
I tell people don't file an IC3 notice now, which for those who don't know is when you have an online threat or certain things happening that are clearly violations of law, it now goes to the new FBI. And there are clearly agents who are probably behaving within it, even though they probably oppose him. But the system is so different now in that case, exactly. And we have a whistleblower story in the air with Tulsi Gabbard.
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's very, very scary, and I um, we're as we head towards the midterms, you can see um, a storm is brewing, and there's going to be a big confrontation. And I don't know how it will end up, but I'd be stunned if Trump didn't do something like invoke the Insurrection Act, or you have ballot areas flooded by ice.
Mhm.
And I'd be surprised if there was not some violence along the way. I mean, the polls, the bright note is the polls really are swinging pretty dramatically towards the Democrats now. I mean, there was a state Senate race in Texas, I believe it was state Senate, but it was a rural area where Trump won by 20% in November, and now a Democrat is leading by 19%. Well,
But
that's
aside from the voter disenfranchisement issue, we have let's say is this a Trump issue or do we have a MAGA party issue?
well, it predates. This goes back to Jim Crow. This goes back to the Civil War. I mean, which was followed by Jim Crow. And when I grew up in Dallas, I mean, it was very hard. They had those. What do they? What was a quiz they did? They had a poll tax, among
The
other
poll
things,
tax, right?
but they also had a
Literacy
quiz.
tests.
Yeah, but that have one of the questions be how many jelly beans are there in
Right,
this
right.
jar with 3,000 jelly, and they were ridiculous questions designed to exclude black people, and they were successful.
Hmm. Well, we had like Raffensperger and some officials in certain states who I'm not going to assume I know what's in their mind, but they seem to stand up and say, "Hey, look, in our state, you're not going to do this." But those walls are crumbling. We have too many people who are least ideologically compromised as part of MAGA to participate in the destruction of the voting at their state level.
Right. So these are exciting times, but
That's what the Confucius adage, "May you live in interesting times," was not a blessing; it was a bit of a curse.
right. There was a little irony in there, I think. Yeah.
What do you think that citizens who are paying attention to the news with Epstein breaking, and we should go into the Epstein revelations about Russia, but what do you think that they should think about when they're getting bombarded with what I call cognitive warfare?
Well, I think the Epstein, and I wrote a lot about it in American Kompromat, but I think it may be a big ray of hope here, especially when we saw. I especially thought that when I first saw the defection of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and that a
Mhm,
lot of MAGA people, it's a very, very important issue to them, and so far it seems like they're not letting go,
mhm.
and whether we can get the Justice Department to release the next 3 million pages or not, I don't know. I
Mhm.
don't have any prediction. And whether or not they will unredact things. There's still a lot of information out there that, I mean, I really haven't read all 3 million pages, as you can
Yeah, yeah.
imagine.
No,
But I
like the
think that,
Putin being mentioned 1,200 times, I will tell the viewers that I've already come through a lot of those. And a lot of them are news clippings or the way I get, Google alerts. They're basically a bunch of, headlines that he gets in a daily feed. So there's that. But then there's the emails. So what have you heard already, at least in some re-reporting from those new connections about the Kremlin work that stand out to you?
well, one of the most important things, and this may be even more important than Trump, is Putin has long said that whoever controls artificial intelligence controls the world. And I've reported some of this in American Kompromat in my Substack, but there are two women there. One is Masha Drokova.
Hmm.
She's since married and has a different last name, Butcher. But
She was in the Nashi group, right? That's the you talking about? She
yes,
was a Nashi member, right?
she was head of Nazi, really, and
Right.
and and
Sure.
and it's been compared to Hitler Youth. But when she
Hmm.
was head of Nazi, Putin came to one of her rallies, and she ran across the stage and kissed him, and became known as the girl who kissed Putin, and there's a documentary out about her from that regard. Um, she soon moved to New York and got a job with who else but Jeffrey Epstein as a publicist. She was a publicist. He was one of her clients. Um, but she's in the recently released documents a lot, and among other things, again, Putin had said AI is so important, and she went on to Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist, and she has a VC fund with over $500 million. She works with Sam Altman of OpenAI, and I don't know, it raises interesting questions about national security. So that's one thing, and I think there's a lot more in the files that I really haven't digested yet.
That's what I
But
mean. The cognitive warfare aspect is like I call it the human DDoS. Essentially, whereas a DDoS attack on a server is to hit it with a lot of requests until it shuts down. When we're inundated with so much data, and you see how the DOJ is releasing, well, here's all these files, and
right,
then someone else comes and says, well, it's only like this much percentage, and it's well, here's the database you can sign in, and I know I've had trouble just figuring out, well, what do I want to search to get somewhere because it's not really a sophisticated searching system. It's kind of designed not to get anywhere.
right. No, and I mean, Steve Bannon said floods the zone, and
Flood the
that's
zone.
what we're doing, and it's confusing because you've got 18 major stories that could be page one stories, and there's just too much out there for people to handle.
Right. So I know a lot of you who are joining us are already very likely subscribed to Craig's Substack, but I would like to ask you to do one more thing: is don't forget to actually pay for at least the basic monthly. And the reason is, as I've said with the other guests that we've had, Brian Karem, Frank Figluzzi, Sean Penner, is that um, our news system is falling apart. And I want to address that a little bit since you're a journalist via your books, is that the modern press being eliminated by Washington Post by Jeff Bezos is being controlled by corporate powers, and now people have more direct access to you. So address that a little bit with me about your role as an author and those people who are journalists and what we need to do as the fourth estate to help
Right.
our viewers and our listeners and our readers.
Well, it's pretty scary, really. When I started in journalism, I mean, what got me excited in a way was that one story by one journalist. I'm thinking of the My Lai massacre, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate was two reporters,
Mhm.
but one big story like that could seize control of the national conversation. All Americans basically shared the same set of facts, and it could lead to change that you remember 50 years later.
Correct.
Uh, Today, that's virtually impossible, I think. And we call it the legacy press. Legacy refers to dead people. It means it's
Maybe
been.
that's why we call it that. I love being an independent journalist because I don't have someone who's going to tell me we're not going there. The legal department's not interested, or the even more is the CEO of GE doesn't want you to talk about that. But like today, we had Financial Times saying that Zelensky was going to announce elections in spring, and I have a pretty good sniffer at this, being a journalist. No, he didn't. That's not what happened. Hold on, who said this? Christopher Miller at FT. No, hold on. And I go to Ukrainian press, and I can make phone calls here. I learned this from the type of people like Woodward and Bernstein who had the patience to do this. So, what do we need to remember about what they did to do the work with Daniel Ellsberg to get that out there? When we have press now, there are people who need to increase their standards
Well,
to be more
absolutely.
hungry for it.
I mean, if you're doing it on Substack too, I mean, um, there's so much poisonous crap around. I
Right.
mean, everything is polluted. There's so much disinformation, and even when it's not polluted, I mean, on Substack, finally, I may have 75 people covering the same story, and I may want 2 or 3 angles, but not 75, even when
Right.
these people are good. So, this has to sort itself out, and it's not happening fast enough, and I really think you need to have, some kind of regulation for social media and for Silicon Valley, and I was horrified during the most recent presidential election. I had been on Twitter for a fair amount. I had a pretty good following, 50,000 people or so. And then suddenly Elon Musk took over and the conversation changed dramatically and switched
Correct.
dramatically to the right. And Twitter used to be pretty good because as a journalist, I would know dozens of really good journalists, and I could sort of pick and choose and curate my own ideal newspaper as a way.
Right.
Now you can't do that. And when I would do a reasonably clever tweet, I could reach 1,000,000 people. Now I tend to reach 678 people every fucking time. And it's clear the algorithms are being tweaked and I'm being shadow banned, but I don't know if there's anything I can do about it.
This is what we're going to do about it. This is exactly why I'm an advocate for going to this platform, and at least in this capacity. Not just that it's the platform, but we will directly rewire that network as organic as possible. I was at Pacifica Radio, WBI up in New York, KPFT in Houston for me, and I learned, early on that the power of that 100,000 watts of FM radio really could help people in my community that normally would be ignored. And so
Right.
I feel that we have that here. I'm getting a notice that Brian Karim is posting something. We have journalists like Brian Karim on this platform. We have experts that were called up by MSNBC and CNN to speak to the people. And now they're directly available here to talk. And Jim Acosta is unfiltered.
Right. No, a lot of this is terrific stuff, I think. I mean, it's just, there are people who've never heard of Substack, and it takes a while for it to, and I have to say I have some concern because having been on, I'm an old guy. I hate social media. Developing a following, no, developing a following does not come natural. I'll tweet and tweet and tweet if I have to, but it's not what I really want to do with my life.
Mhm.
And so I build up a following, and Elon Musk pulls the rug out from under me.
Right,
And I wonder with Substack, I don't know. Mark Andreessen is one of the owners. Does he have the power to do that? I don't know.
right. I think the people should do that. I think those who feel overwhelmed as citizens, instead of just being spectators, can be more active and finding the voices that give them what I think it was good information nutrition, and sharing where they're seeing the information that helps them. Because when I was on Sergeant Gannell's space about Jan 6 conversations and what he's going through, he says, well, Trump likes the immigrant wives, and some of the people actually see some of the people in here. So, well, you need to talk about Craig Unger's book. And that immediately I went from being just writing on here, said, we're going to get videos fired up and we're going to have conversations. So that's part of what this is about.
Well, great. No, it's wonderful, and I hope you have I mean, where is your following, by the way? Mostly, is it in
I have
yeah.
20,000 on, yeah, well, no, I have 20,000 on Twitter. I had 25. And like you said, when Elon came out, literally 5,000 people were eliminated. Some of them because they quit the platform. They quit it entirely for the toxicity purposes. But beginning, I mean, I had been writing over here barely. And then I literally realized this was the place, at least for now, where people are paying attention in a more, like I said, information nutrition level. They don't want to just be bombarded. They want to know something better, and they want to know it more authentically. And
Right,
that's why I
right,
feel like even with only, like, right now I'm at 330 or 40 followers, but I know it's less about the followers than the quality of what we're saying and what we're doing. We need quality.
right. Absolutely.
So I definitely want everyone to not only follow Craig, but will you come back and have updated conversations because this is going to be a chaotic midterms period.
You think? Yeah, no, I'd be delighted to come back, and it's things are changing so much, and I before I came on here, I was watching Pam Bondi, and it's just beyond. I
Mm,
mean, beyond the pale, and um, it's hard to imagine people like that, but they're in control of our government.
right. I strongly advocate for people buying the very cheap, spongy flip flops. I learned this with Ted Cruz. When you throw those at your 60-inch high definition TV, it just bounces off,
Oh,
so you can do it repeatedly.
yeah.
Um, I will say this, as someone who's lived in Ukraine now for 4 years, I've really developed a deep respect for a lot of the independent press that fights hard to hold its government accountable. And I will use the reference of what happened in last summer when I was down in Mykolaiv. There was a passage that was of a bill that was going to rein in some powers of the corruption agencies that were created in 2014, and the people hit the streets immediately for a week and said, "The hell you will!" And in 7 days, it was changed. It was rolled back, and you know that is not happening in America.
Yeah. Um, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. In March 28th, we have another No King's Day, and I hope it'll be even bigger than before. I think they've been pretty
Mm,
successful. People are being very well behaved. They turn out in great numbers. And if we can hit 10 million, I think it went from 4 to 7 million last time. And I don't know. I think it's going to. Trump is getting freaked out already. You can tell.
hmm I want to thank you for being here, and I want to remind our viewers to not only follow your account, consider paying for at least the bare. I don't know, you probably have yours set at $5. Pay that bare part, much like you would buy your newspaper. I used to have, my printed newspapers coming to my house on a regular basis. I know they're digital now, but I still have a digital subscription to New York Times, so I can go through the archives. And here, same thing, by paying Craig's, basic tab on there, it will help, build this platform up. And I want all of you to help build up his voice, reboost what you see there. Don't just read it and move on, interact with it, reboost it and repost it. I have people say, well, I don't have that many followers. That's okay. If you have 5 followers, 10 followers, 100 followers, reboosting helps making sure people see his content and keeps it from being shadow banned.
Right. Well, I
So
really appreciate that. And no, it's an interesting way to cover things, and I'll be keep posting, and I appreciate uh, being on your show.
I appreciate you. This is our time, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. Craig, thank you. Be safe, be strong, and we'll bring you back on as soon as possible. Actually, there's too much to cover, and we need people who have focused on these topics. So I want to
Okay.
thank you for being here with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Chris.
See you soon.
Bye.
So, to our viewers, I want to thank you for joining us. And same thing here. I do independent journalism here directly from Ukraine with fire in my belly every single day to tell you what's happening because we have drones and missiles flying directly over my apartment, hitting our power facilities. We have people freezing in their buildings, elders, and if not everyone here is watching is in America. I have friends who are in Europe and even in Ukraine. Um, you're really the ones who can make a difference by getting out of what I call the zombie food truck. Oh, let me explain that. I said, "Do you want to be zombie food or do you want to be useful?" I want to be useful. Good. I don't have skills though. Yes, you do. Can you move a box from the left side of the table to the right side of the table? Yeah, that's a skill. That's a skill that's needed right now. That's what I mean by finding not just Craig's post, but other posts that are quality information and sharing that with others. Take it and put it in the email. Take it like people do with me and inundate me with incoming messages on a regular basis. Did you see this article? Did you see that issue? And did you see that author? Do that part. If you do that part, we can actually make a difference. I don't know if you see the amount of traffic that your ideological rivals, the adversaries, and even I'll even go further to say your enemies are emboldened right now. I watch the numbers that they have on Twitter Spaces, and they have in the hundreds talking about the craziest, stupidest stuff, but with that bent to favor Elon Musk, to favor Donald Trump, to keep Trumpism alive. And the numbers clearly show that they do not have that umph. I mean, look at the viewers just from the Super Bowl and silly vanilli is what people are calling Kid Rock. They couldn't muster the money to pay for licenses to broadcast on X. Why? Why didn't the billionaire throw the money down? Because it's a failing, dying cult. And you can do your part by making sure that you're, again, reboosting the quality of voices. Like I have an announcement right here. Jim Acosta is going live. Frank Figluzzi goes live. Brian Karem is live. Tomorrow we're going to talk to John Fugelsang about how they rob the scriptures in order to weaponize it. Like, can anyone believe that? Yes, of course you believe it, that Mike Johnson wanted to have a debate with over the Bible with the Pope, an American Pope, no less, who knows Americans' predilection for racism and knows our dynamic. And he dared do that. I wrote a post about that here on my account. Take the time to read what I write. I love to get up in the morning and someone says, "What keeps you on fire?" I wake up and I sit there at the cafe and I just pound out whatever's going on to say, when all this money went to Ukraine, all this money went to Ukraine. No, money stays in America that helps Ukraine. And why does Lance Gooden vote against the artillery factory in his own town in Mesquite, Texas? And why do these guys who are in Arkansas and Kansas vote against their own constituents and shit on Ukraine when actually the money stays and employs people there? Why do we allow Elon Musk to weaponize that platform, or Mark Zuckerberg weaponize that platform, when there should be FTC cases that open up of anti competition class actions against this? Because you're no longer, well, for one, you've never been the customer. You've been the commodity. I used to say this when I was talking about how ISIS propaganda was weaponized. When I said, well, I would have to tell constantly on television, we have to remember that we are the commodity. We are the thing that Marvel Comics and Sony wants to sell things to us. But you know what? What major corporation wants to work with X now? They don't. They really have no vested interest to it. But someone else does. The cryptocurrency theft types, the people who are scammers, the head scammer himself. So you can combat that, but you're going to have to focus on really what those topics look like. Get informed. Try to be less reactionary to the headlines. That's why I said about the human DDoS attack version of this. The less reactive we are, and I totally understand it, but the less reactive we are, the more focused we are on what the actual issues are, the more we can address it. And I use an example like today. I wrote the column about the corruption numbers. The Transparency Corruption Index was released for 2025. America went down even further, but Ukraine was going up. And yet you wouldn't know that if you paid attention to only the headlines, because you get this word used and abused. But look at the numbers. How many people watch Bad Bunny this weekend? And how many people watch Kid Rock? And how many people are filling up these portals of social media that are the right wing when are essentially counterbalance? And I don't want to say left wing, because I have friends that are conservative. They're losing their minds about Trump. They want a normal civil way of discussing things again, and they don't like having ICE beating up on their neighbors. They work with people who are in these communities that are affected, and we need to reach out to those people in our family, our circles, and open that dialogue with those people who are disaffected by the Republican Party, maybe still Republican, people who are even MAGA. I know some that have turned against Donald Trump despite what I didn't know if they ever would, but they do. And in the coming weeks, like I said, tomorrow we'll have John Fugelsang. On Friday we'll have Sean Penner. I'll do Culture Saturday this week. And then I've got next week a few surprises for you. But I'm bringing on Fred Wellman soon and Rick Wilson soon. Colonel Morris Davis, who's run repeatedly for office in North Carolina, who was the former Chief Justice for Guantanamo Bay before he walked out. Phil Eyre, I want to have some of these great voices of folks that are really calling out, but also know that sort of middle America voice, because this is not the America that we really want. And the numbers show that people are fed up. So you can write me if you have suggestions, if you have some guests you think we should talk about. I basically, like right now, again, Slava Boho, we happen to have lights. But even if the lights are out, the Wi-Fi will work, and I am wired to keep broadcasting no matter what. I'm on day 1,402 of full-scale war. I never take a break, never take a vacation. I'll do that when I'm dead one day. I'm not going to do that now. No time to sleep. The action must happen. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Feel free to repass this video afterwards when it's on the platform, and we will see you soon. So God bless America. Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava і пиздець Російській Федерації.